Hello Internet, it's Skorkowski, and today I want to talk about something a little bit different. This month marks the 10-year anniversary for my serial pulp hero thief, the Black Raven. February of 2008, the first Black Raven story, The Pour-Off Switch, hit print in Flashing Swords magazine. Since then, we've released 20 stories and 2 collections and audiobooks and all that. But just to commemorate the occasion, I actually just want to talk about the Black Raven, talk about the character, and kind of the history leading up to now. Because in some ways it doesn't feel like it's been 10 years, in other ways it feels like it's been a lot longer than that. Now, the character was first born kind of during a moment of writer's block during another project. I decided to write a kind of a thief story in a fantasy setting about a pickpocketing sailor that gets framed for a murder. And the only way that he seems to escape the case that he's in is he ends up getting drafted by this giant international mafia. And I gave the story, which is originally titled Revenge of the Black Raven, a very open ending, where it's like, kind of what happens next. And 100% of my beta readers and my workshop critique group and my friends that all read it came back going, hey, this is a great story, I really like it, but that ending just doesn't work for me. I don't like the ending. Now, of course, I was all like, well, it's brilliant and I love it the way it is and I'm not going to change it. Which, by the way, helpful tip for any authors out there, if 100% of your readership says that something is a problem, they might have a point. Needless to say, The Revenge of the Black Raven, it was a very hard thing for me to sell. I got rejected a lot. But I was never going to touch this series again, or so I believed. But then, a couple years later, about a year or so later, I up and got married, and for our honeymoon we went to Venice, Italy. And while we were there, I saw so many things that gave me a lot of inspiration. So when I came back, I ended up writing a new story. And this one not about a fledgling thief, but more of a master thief, kind of some sort of James Bond level character that you call in when no one else can pull off a certain heist. And I decided to cast the same character, Arn, the Black Raven, for it. And so even though I said I was never going to revisit him, I revisited him. And once I was done with Race for the Night Ruby, I was kind of looking at this one story where he's kind of this beginning newbie and this other story where he's this super badass thief, and I thought, okay, so what happens in the middle here? So I filled that in with a couple more stories, and then I just kind of kept going with the series, and next thing you know, I've got a full series on my hand. My original plan with them was going to be that I was going to publish them in all these different fantasy magazines, and all independently, because they all were essentially standalone stories, and then eventually, after some time, assemble them all together in a larger collection. Sort of the same way that Fritz Leiber did with the Fafhrd and Grey Mouser series, or was done after his death to the Robert E. Howard Conan series, all the classic pulps. And this is what I was going for, was that pulp sort of feel. And one magazine that I ended up submitting to was Flashing Swords, and after a couple months I heard back from their editor, wonderful woman by the name of Crystal Wizard, and she says, look, I really like this story, but I'm not going to accept it. And the reason is because of the ending. It's not going to, the readers are not going to feel satisfied, they're going to want to know a little bit more what happens. But I'm willing to reconsider under 2 conditions. You could either A, change the ending to give it a little bit more closure, or B, you could easily keep going with this. You could turn this into a novel or a series. And I messaged her back and I said, well, actually it is going to be a series. And at that time I think I was at 5 or 6 stories total. And I told her what I was planning on doing, and she said, well, I'll tell you what, send me the second story. So I sent her the second story, and she gets back with me about 2 hours later and says, I'll take it. So then, February of 2008, Flashing Swords magazine issue number 9 was released with my Black Raven story, The Pour-Off Switch. Now, I'm not going to make any apologies about that cover. It is just as cringeworthy as you believe it is. Now, but one thing that I love about that cover is there is my name on it. And being an author, the first time that you actually get to hold a book that has your name on it, and someone paid you to be in this book, and they put you on the cover, but also inside the book there was an illustration for my story, which was drawn by a gentleman named Miko, or Maiko, I don't know how he pronounces that, but it was also the first time that somebody had actually just drawn a picture from something from one of my stories. It was the first time I ever got to see what Arn looked like. Doesn't actually quite look exactly like him, but it was the way somebody imagined Arn looking based off my descriptions of him, and that was that was a big deal for me. That was a big monumental day. In total, I sold about 6 stories to Flashing Swords magazine. The next one, The Reluctant Assassin, became the featured story for Flashing Swords number 11. And for that, they gave me the cover. So they assigned me cover artist Johnny Perkins, who read the story, and he came up with this nice little painting that inspired for the cover. And one thing that I really love about this cover is in the back left of it, you can see the towers of Lunasburg, which are all carved to look like the kings of Eld holding up these torches. And that was really cool, getting to see this place that I had imagined and set several stories in, so that was cool. But then also, Flashing Swords gave me an interior picture. It was 2 pages long, and Johnny and I worked on that, so that was really cool. I had a 2-page spread also featuring Aaron. So this was also a big deal for me. So the second Black Raven story is now the featured story in a magazine, and that was really cool. So then I started talking with them, and they set me up with a gentleman named Jason Waltz. And Jason was going to be doing anthologies for Flashing Swords and kind of a best of, and we started talking about doing a Black Raven collection. And it was kind of a good idea. We started kind of getting stories together. He kind of gave me a number of stories that I should hit, or at least a word count that I should hit. But around this same time, Flashing Swords ends up selling out to defunct Enterprises, who takes it over. And defunct Enterprises had a lot of problems. And the first issue that they handled, which was Flashing Swords number 12, came out about 5 or 6 months late. The interior for it was just awful. The interior for it was just laid out terribly. It was kind of an embarrassing thing to happen after the previous books. But that ended up being the last issue ever of Flashing Swords magazine. They folded very shortly after that. Now, they did send us proofs of what the next issue was going to be, what issue 13 would look like. And for that one, I was also the featured story. The Ferrymaster's Toll was going to be their kind of flagship story for it, but it never happened, and all we have is this author proof that they had sent out. So that was disappointing. So they returned all the rights to us, and now I'm standing there. I've got a handful of Black Raven stories. A few of them have published, a few of them haven't. But since the rights are returned to me, I got a hold of Jason Waltz, who had now founded his own publishing house, Rogue Blades Entertainment. And he's like, yeah, let's keep going with this. So we decided on the title Mountain of Daggers for the collection title. And we started kind of putting together the stories. And the last one that I wrote for it was going to be 13 stories, about 95,000 words. The last story was the 7th General, sort of a reflection on my time as a banker when they gave us a new boss. And that was a miserable experience getting a new boss there. And around that time, Jason goes off to Dragon Con, and there he meets the editor-in-chief for a very large fantasy publisher, very big one. And they get to talking about the pulp stories, and Jason mentions me and this project that we're working on. And this editor looks at him and is like, wow, do you mind if I get a look at this? This sounds like something that I would love. So Jason comes back from Dragon Con, he gets a hold of me, and he's like, look, I know that this is not really in my best interest, but this publisher could do all sorts of great things for you, things that I never could. I think you should take them up on it. I said, okay. So we sent off the first story for them to review. And the editor gets back to me about 2 to 3 weeks later, which in publishing, that is lightning fast. And she says, I love it. Send me the full manuscript. So we bundle up the whole manuscript, send it in. She said, okay, it's going to be like 2 to 3 months before I can get back to you. I'm like, okay, great. 2 to 3 months. So in the meantime, I'm still writing more Black Raven stories and other stories. I end up publishing one more in a different anthology. The Second Gift came out in the Time in the Bottle anthology. It was the first Black Raven story that I had written and published that was not going to be in Mountain of Daggers, because I was preparing for whatever the next collection or book was going to be. And I continued waiting. Finally, after 24 months of not getting an answer, it was actually really beginning to drag me down. You start becoming a little bit depressed, because it's that I was in a holding pattern. I didn't know, what was going to happen. I really just wanted either a yes or a no, something to move on. And I finally withdrew my submission from the publisher because I just had to get something. But it was also because there was kind of talks going on that Rogue Blades Entertainment and Black Gate Magazine were going to be teaming up and we're going to be publishing books. And Jason contacted me, said, we want you for this. We want that Black Raven collection for it since they're taking too long to get back to you. And I was like, absolutely. So I withdrew it, and then the deal with Rogue Blades and Blackgate falls through. So now, once again, I'm kind of standing there. I've got a handful of stories in my hand, and it has been a couple years. Well, in the meantime, I'm working on my own a new novel. I finished that up. I sell Dameron to be my debut novel to Ragnarok Publications. And around this time, which is 2013 now, Jason, who's basically the only person that's running Rogue Blades, is a one-man outfit. He gets a hold of me and he's like, okay, we're ready to do it. Let's do the Black Raven. And I said, awesome. And he said, okay, instead of doing one book that's 95,000 words, how would you feel about adding some more stories, and we could do 2 books that are each 70,000 words? And I said, okay. So I looked through all the Black Raven stuff that I had amassed at that point, and I was like, well, it just so happens it comes to exactly 140,000 words. We can split that right up the middle. And so we took some of the stories from the first book and we shuffled them and moved them to the second book and kind of played with it a little bit till we ended up with 2 books that were going to be 70,000 words. And it says, okay, well, what do you want the title for the second book to be? I'm like, well, I don't know. I hadn't gotten that far. So we bounced around some ideas and we said that, well, the first book was going to be called Mountain of Daggers, based off this pendant that Arn wears. It's kind of a plot point in the stories. I said, well, let's go with this landscape theme. So you could do forests and rivers and plains, and I decided on sea. And we decided that since Arn signs all of his big heists or his murders with leaving a Black Raven quill, that we'd call it Sea of Quills. And I like that, a Mountain of Daggers, Sea of Quills. And he asked, hey, what do you want for the first cover? He hired this artist, his name is Dieter Normand. He's a French artist. He's going to do the covers for you. I said, well, all I want for the cover is I want there to be the Mountain of Daggers pendant. I want that to be prominent on there. And I don't want you to really see Arn's face. I want it to be a little masked in shadow. And he's like, okay, great. What exactly does that Mountain of Daggers pendant look like? And I'm like, I don't know. I described it as a mountain made of upturned daggers to represent this Brotherhood of Thieves. But I couldn't tell you exactly what that actually looks like. So the first thing that Dieter Normand does is he actually goes through several different concept sketches for the Mountain of Daggers symbol. And eventually we kind of decide on one. And we get the first cover for Mountain of Daggers, which is going to be a wraparound cover. So that's the front and the spine and the back that was going to go around the book. And they started working for Sea of Quills. So we go through a few versions of that until we settle. And the Sea of Quills cover, that picture by Dieter Normand, is my favorite image of Arn ever. I absolutely love it. I love the colors. I love the fact that, once again, you can see Lunisburg with the statues that look like the Kings of Eld holding up the torches. And it's just an absolutely beautiful cover. I actually have the original from Dieter Normand because I loved it so much. And so we started going forward from there. And then Jason says, look, I'm kind of getting over my head. I got some other stuff going on, and I can't do it. So he ends up selling me, so I go from Rogue Blades to Ragnarok Publications, who at that point had already published my first novel, Dameron, and my Valdekin series, and that was selling great. So they said, oh, we'll love it, we'll take it, but we don't want the cover art. So Ragnarok hired another artist, Alex Respot, and Alex came up with 2 beautiful cover images for it. Absolutely loved them. And then cover designer Sean King got his hands on it, and he gave us a beautiful cover design and layout. And so we had Mountain of Daggers and Sea of Quills. Now, during this time, to get ready for the Mountain of Daggers release, which has been delayed a long period between here, I decided that I wanted to have some pendants made for Arn's pendant, the Mountain of Daggers. And I figured, you know what, I can also make this a promotional item. But truth be told, I really just wanted it for me. I wanted to hold it in my hand. So I shopped around, and I ended up finding a company out of Australia called Campaign Coins. And I called them up, said, can you guys do this? And their owner, a nice gentleman named Mark Morrison, messaged me back, and he's like, oh yeah, we can definitely do this. So it doesn't sound like that. Imagine him being Australian, but I can't do good Australian. And so Mark and his team, they kind of take the Dieter Normand picture, they digitize it, clean it up, and they make these Mountain of Dagger pendants from Campaign Coins. And I absolutely Love these things. I actually have quite a bit of them. We did most of them in the copper, like in the story, but different metals represent the different ranks in the organization. So I had some gold ones also made that were for both myself and some of the editors that I'd worked with, and Dieter Norman got one. And so the Mountain of Daggers was finally released in March of 2015. And so that was the first time that the original story, A Birth of the Black Raven, finally hit print, and all of the others were finally in print again after several years, and that was a great feeling. I loved that. And then later that year, in October 2015, Sea of Quills came out, which was the second printing for the second gift, which had originally appeared in Time in a Bottle, and that came out. And to commemorate that one, I always buy myself some sort of present for a book release. I had a glass stiletto made from a glass worker, and these are the weapons of Arn's nemesis slash love interest, Polnock, an assassin who uses these glass tri-bladed stilettos and breaks them off inside of her victims. So that's pretty cool. You know, once again, I like to have some sort of artifact from my stories to be able to hold, so it's a little treat that I give myself. But then, so Black Raven came out with its 2 books, and then we did the audiobooks. Those are narrated by R.C. Bray. Wonderful audiobooks. R.C. Bray and I have now worked together on 6 projects, so I'm a huge fan of him, and I love working with him. And everything was going wonderfully until August of 2017, after a long story that doesn't need to be gone into, I ended up severing my relationship with Ragnarok Publications. I ended up canceling my contracts with them and leaving them altogether. So, August 2017, I'm kind of staying there. I have my no publisher anymore, and I'm kind of scrambling, trying to find homes for some of my stuff. And I end up finding Crossroad Press. And Crossroad looks at Black Raven. They said, we'll absolutely love to take this. So we go through a new round of edits on them to clean up any typos that have lingered this whole time, or fix any clunky phrasing. Because at this point the stories are, I've changed a lot as an author. I've gotten a lot better over the years, and so we're kind of tightening up some of the phrasing. So then in November of 2017, Crossroad Press re-releases Mountain of Daggers and Sea of Quills, and those are finally back out, and that was wonderful. And then just this past week, this February 2018, I actually got my author copies for the new Mountain of Daggers by Crossroad Press. It's actually from their imprint Mystique Press, but it's Crossroad, and so they're just a little bit bigger than the old Ragnarok versions. They have a larger size to them, but that also means that they're going to be a little bit thinner because the pages are bigger. But so Mountain of Daggers is finally back out in paperback, so that is wonderful. Sea of Quills hasn't come out yet, but it's going to be coming out shortly. But so in 10 years, from the very first story coming out, when the Porvov Switch was released in February 2008, which is the first time I ever got to hold one of my stories in a printed medium, and my name was on the cover. 10 years later, I am now holding a Black Raven book, the newest one, that has the Porvov Switch in it. So it's kind of a cool thing. Another thing that I thought was amazing was I used to do a writers group that was Barnes & Noble in Louisville, Texas. And the first time that I walked into the Barnes & Noble there, and I saw the Black Raven books on the shelf, and I'm thinking to myself, I actually wrote and workshopped a lot of these books about 30 feet over there. And now they're on the shelf in the same bookstore. And that was also a very, very cool feeling. Now one little last thing is 10 years ago, February 2008, I had 2 releases that month. And one other story that wasn't a Black Raven story, but it might as well have been, because it was a thief heist adventure that took place in the exact same world as the Black Raven, just he wasn't in it. That was published that month through a different magazine called Black Static. And that story I sold to Black Static in August of 2005. So after 30 months, it came out in Black Static Issue 3, The Mist of Lichthofen, which that was a really big sale. So I've gone from an unpublished author, kind of a hopeful author, to in 1 month I have 2 magazines come out that I'm in, and that was a really good month for me. By the way, that was a trip. And about a year after Mr. Lichthofen came out, I was contacted, TTA Press, who publishes it. They got a hold of me and they said, we're doing this podcast. It's called Transmissions from Beyond. Would you be interested in reading The Mist of Lichthofen for our podcast? And I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. So I read my story, the Mist of Lichthofen. I am not a voice actor. I have the utmost respect for voice actors because they have a very amazing talent that a lot of people assume they can do until they try it. I've tried it. I'm not a voice actor. But I read it and I had a lot of fun doing it. And the podcast, unfortunately, is long gone. But I have the recording that I had made. And that was actually my very first thing I'd ever posted on YouTube, was The Mist of Lichthofen. So I'm actually going to put that at the end of this video. So anybody that's kind of interested in what it is I write or what it's like, it's a fantasy heist story with a good flair of a horror edge. The non-Black Raven story. And of course I'm going to put links down at the bottom for any of the, where you can find the Black Raven stories, but this isn't about that. This is really just about 10 years from the first story until now. The Black Raven has had a lot of triumphs and setbacks and misses and all sorts of things, but throughout it all, he's still chugging along, and I hope to have some more stories out pretty soon. But if you're still with me, thank you for listening, and have a great day.